Jamis, have you ever had a dream about your first episode?
Yes, many times.
If I may, please take some advice from a seasoned podcaster. Don't try to impress anyone. You're a mindful moviegoer. We all know that. Be simple, be direct, nothing fancy.
I understand. Nothing fancy.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
What's Dune Part 2 like, David?
It's breathtaking. Where you see entertainment here, just imagine a narrative rich with biblical themes. You dive in and you can't even reach the bottom.
You dive in?
Yes. It's called Popcorn Theology.
I don't believe you.
Well, you can see for yourself.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 333, that's kind of fun, of Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with the greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Dave Muad'Dib Usol, if I may be so bold. It's either that or Dave Ralpha, which actually was.
Oh, yeah. And I am Sihaya, but I prefer Maddy.
And I'm Jamis.
Yeah, so sorry about earlier, Jamis. To be fair, you challenged me, and so, it happens.
It makes sense. I don't hold it against you.
Yeah, well, may your blade chip and shatter, all of that business. By the way, if you were just listening to this and not watching it, you're missing out. This is fun. Fantastic. And so, Maddy, what are we covering this week? I wonder.
I don't know. Something with sand in it, desert, something. Are we on Tatooine?
I was going to say.
Star Wars.
I
Star
hate
Wars,
sand.
yeah. I hate sand.
This movie's not for you.
Yeah, if you're like Anakin, don't watch this movie. But no, we're looking at Dune Part 2, directed by Denis Villeneuve and starring Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Javier Bardem, and many more.
Yeah, yep. Dune is about Paul Atreides, and he unites with Chani and the Freemen while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. And so he's facing a choice between the love of his life and the fate of the universe, and he must prevent a terrible future only that he can foresee.
Yeah, there's so much to this story that even finding a good plot summary that was effective is tough, and that's pretty good. That's a pretty good one. And so, good work.
Did you write that one?
I stole it from someone on the internet.
Oh, yeah, of course, no credit.
That's how the internet works, right?
Yeah.
But I will say...
And you can believe everything on the internet.
Everything, especially if you hear it on Popcorn Theology.
I read that on the internet.
Right, yeah. That's my favorite Abraham Lincoln quote. Or Frank Herbert quote. Actually, I'm sure he would have said the exact opposite. Herbert's views on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. If he had known of the internet in the 60s. But so this is a part 2. And so if you have not seen Dune Part 1 or Dune Part 2 for that matter, this is not going to make as much sense as an episode. I'm also going to lose this because I thought I could put up with it longer than I could.
Yeah, I had to lose mine. I'm like, nope.
The nose
also,
guard.
mine is still slightly wet because I just got done painting it like a couple hours ago.
Oh, no.
So.
Oh, wow.
So you're going to have like black paint on your face? I don't see any.
There's a little on my neck down here. You can't really see. I had the cord tucked in, so
I literally have mine taped to my.
I'm gonna take it off
to my
now.
face. Anyway, so we recorded an episode on Dune Part 1. I think it's episode 249. This was me, Jam, and Miles. And so unlike the cast for this movie, we have a very different lineup compared to our Part 1 episode. So I want to just real quick mention to our listeners, go ahead and check that out. This before we did video episodes, at least regularly, and it was before we changed some of our formatting stuff. And so in that episode, things are a little bit different. But there's some really great discussion points that we're not going to get into as much on this episode. For example, there's a lot of talk about desert imagery, some talk about Christ parallels, the role of prophecy. Some of those we will get to. And one of the big themes from that episode that at least that I took away was this idea that the meek shall inherit the earth. And so if you're interested in any of those or the Dune world, go check out the first episode. But I will shout this out there, just have some grace with me on that episode, because my story, much like that movie, this was just the beginning. And so we're picking up from there. But before we get into spoilers, we're going to give this film some popcorn theology ratings. Yet another thing we weren't doing back at episode 249, 2.5 years ago. And so from a popcorn perspective, what did you guys think of this film? In terms of our ratings, we have sort of bad, good, and great. And so bad would be stale, fresh would be good, and then buttered and salted would be great. And so let's go with the ratings and then like a 1-minute reason why. So Maddy, kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of a Dune fan, and I hadn't even heard of it before the movie came out, but I made sure to read the book before I went to see it. And I thought this part 2 especially was buttered and salted. I feel like it's been a while since we've had like a really good epic tale in theaters, and Villeneuve did not disappoint in this. The visuals are stunning and they match the scale of the story, and I felt like part 2 of the story felt more alive because the world was more explored. We saw more places and people and started to understand like all that setup in part 1. So it seemed like a little more humanized while maintaining the grand scale of it all, and like the music and everything was just, I thought, fantastic.
Fantastic. Jam, I'm sure you agree, right? It's going to be... We were talking offline before. So hit us with it, Jam.
It was fresh. Listen, it was...
Hot takes.
It was too long. It was too long. And this is coming from a guy that loved the Snyder cut of Justice League. I just thought it was too long. I was bored for the first half of the movie. And I read the books. I also read the books, and I don't know. I just struggled to keep interest when I was watching it, and had a hard time paying attention. And it wasn't actually until like the second half of the movie where I was actually all in and really interested in what was going on in it. But I think there were a lot of parts that could have easily been cut out. Now, Maddy, when you're saying it felt like they were adding more to the world and humanizing it, I would agree. Compared to part 1, this definitely did more of that. But just like we were talking about with like things are left out of the books that really build up that world. I think that is one of the things that these two movies like struggle with, is the fact that there is so much detail in those books that clue you in on what's actually happening. But even then, those books are really difficult to follow.
Oh yeah. It's a very difficult read.
Yes.
And it would be difficult to adapt. Yeah. Just fresh. Okay. So out of curiosity, would you say the same about Dune Part 1, or would you say that one was lower, higher, or what?
I think this was better than Dune Part 1.
I agree.
I know by the time I got into Dune 1, it was over. So that's kind of it's like the slow climb.
I think that's the consensus. A lot of people felt that way. And I felt that way about part one as well. Like I was, by the end I was like, oh wait, it's ending there? What a weird way to end it, you know? And so maybe I was more excited just to watch part two and like get into it.
Yeah, just to have some investment, some resolution on what happened in the first one. I compared the first one to like a great pilot for a TV show. You know, like, oh, that was excellent. Where's the next episode? 2 years, and then what ended up being 2.5 years because of the writer's strike and a bunch of other stuff. It got delayed, and so no, it was definitely a frustrating situation. But I walked in more or less blind to the Dune movie, expecting something with some closure at the end, and was a bit frustrated by that. But what that caused me to do is then do kind of like what you guys said, which is go and read the books. But as far as this movie goes, back to the ratings, I think I would put it in the buttered and salted category, but kind of similar to what happened at the theater when I was seeing this movie. There was butter and salt in the top like 3 or 4 inches. And then further down from that, it was a little just fresh at that point. So it's on the buttered and salted side, but not, buttered throughout, not dripping, if you will. And I would agree with Jam that was a too long of a movie. And that's saying something because there's a lot of story to tell. But for me, it wasn't the beginning. It was right around the middle, I would say, or about 2/3 of the way through. It really dragged a while for some strange choices in terms of the pacing and the direction could have been improved. But overall, I thought it was excellent. Part one was a little bit like, when you eat your vegetables, right? You do what you're supposed to do, and then you get to have dessert later. Part two was like the dessert for me overall. You get to enjoy it as a reward because this movie delivered on the narrative and the world building that we get in the first one. And the first one was all scale, world building, and then, of course, the betrayal, spoilers for Dune 1. And and in this one, we really see where everything's going. And so that was, I think, incredibly worth it. We had a lot of visual spectacle. And the thing I was surprised by is how little of that spectacle and even of the music overlapped with Dune Part 1. There were recurring themes, but it wasn't just like, okay, now I'm in the same movie again. It felt fresh and different, which I really appreciated. So any other thoughts on that stuff before we move on?
Yeah, I would say that this one, I think, was easier for me to watch. I don't know, I actually didn't think it was too long. I don't know, I never got bored during it. So, and that's unusual because I got bored during Oppenheimer and I got bored during Killers of the Flower Moon. We've had a lot of really long movies lately.
We've put you through the ringer, haven't we?
I've watched all the long ones. And the thing is you can do long movies and they can be good, but we've had a lot of long movies recently, and I feel like most of them didn't. And this one probably didn't need to, but again, I never felt bored. I was excited because there was a lot more action sequences in this one. Yeah. And just different things to look at, I felt like. Again, going to different worlds, seeing the Harkonnens world and everything. I was interested in going to those other places and also more of the action sequences going on. So it kept me more engaged than part one. Part one felt pretty boring, to be honest. And again, it was a lot of world building and political intrigue that you had to wrap your head around first in order to understand everything that's going to happen in this one. So
yeah, well, I'll agree with that for sure. The pacing in part one was and a lot of it was just you're thrown in the deep end. If you walked into this movie without having seen the 1984 film,
I can imagine. Yeah,
without having read the book, without having any of that, and that was me. I said something the spice must flow, and I think there's worms if that's this one, and there was, and it wasn't the graboids as it turns out, and so I knew nothing walking into the first Dune. But by the time I walked into this one, I was invested, I was excited, and I was looking forward to seeing how they did certain things, and so that was cool. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who didn't read these books until after the first movie came out. In my mind, that's the ideal way to do it. You want to have some visuals to play with in terms of your own imagination. And this allowed you to do that pretty well. So as we get into the discussion, we all know that a film's quality doesn't always equate to the depth of talking points, right? So the theological talking points sometimes are mismatched from the overall film's quality. So this is where we get to our other set of rankings. And so if we're talking about if we're drinking, if you will, from the depth of those themes, then how much is in the cup? Is it diluted? Is it carbonated in that it's good? Or is it cup runneth over in terms of mind-blowing amount of themes? And so, Maddy, kick us off. What did you think?
Yeah, this is definitely the kind of film that my cup runneth over with the water of life. There's just an abundance of things that are worth talking about because it is chock full of religious themes, and the book is as well. I mean, he wrote it that way on purpose. Like, he said that he was inspired by a lot of religious ideas. So, again, I just feel like there are so many different directions we could go with this. And I mean, I had so many points, and hopefully we can get to some in the lightning round because there's definitely a lot.
For sure. Yeah, we'll get to as much as we can. Jam, what are your thoughts?
I'm in the middle of carbonated and my cup running over. A lot of it is like within the movie, you have a lot of politics and a lot of religious themes. And so those seem obvious. I think the reason it's right in the middle is just because it, as a film, does not explain enough for you to get very in depth. And so while it is like obviously religious, I would like them to go a little further to explain more of the religious aspects, so then you can have more thoughtful interaction with the religious aspects, as opposed to, I mean, it's just there. It's like, yep, this is religious. But I mean, all of that being said, there is tons of religious theological implications within the movie. So I think it is the job of the Christian to engage with whatever depths we've been given. That's why I'm right in the middle.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I would agree. You're right. There's definitely a lot that is alluded to, and if you've read the books, then it makes more sense. But I think they tried not to make it quite as overt in the movie, which is usually the kind of thing we really go for here. And so I'm excited to get into the discussion. And I would say that my cup, I would let my cup run over, but I would never spill my water, not even for the dead.
I see. That's good.
Yeah. Now, that being said, I think there's plenty for us to discuss. You know, it's right on the surface for us to harvest, if you will, right? Just like the harvester's going through. But, you know, we'll have to keep an eye out for worm sign. You know, that is the mindless consumption angle. Because, you know, this is the kind of movie that a lot of people might go into with the casual mindset of, oh, I'm just here for the story. And they've already invested so much into it. They may not want to do too much thinking afterwards. But that's why we exist, to see how much these stories tell us about ourselves and tell us about the greatest storyteller of all. And so it seems like we're generally on the same page, though with a little bit of disagreement. Excited to delve a little deeper, see if we can reach the bottom, if you will. But before we get to dropping our spoiler warning, we got a couple of things we want to mention to you guys that you guys can do as our viewers and listeners. And so, Maddy, kick us off with that.
Yeah, so we just want to encourage you guys to like and share this episode with those in your house or your tribe, in your sietch. Is that how you say it? Sietch?
Sietch, yeah.
If you like what you hear, let's broaden the conversation. And again, it's really easy. Just share, comment. Commenting is always great. It helps the algorithm. And like and share.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and you can follow us on social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
Yeah, and one thing I'll mention as well is that some of you hopefully are watching this on YouTube, and we're not just an audio podcast anymore. We're doing the video thing on a regular basis, and so we want to encourage you to, follow us there. Check it out. We're trying to do a little more visual components to the podcast, but getting on YouTube's a little different. You got to like, and there's a bell or something like that. We're still figuring that out. So just do all the stuff on YouTube that makes us show up in your news feed. Let's get those algorithms working for us. And one way that you can help support podcast is to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen. That makes a much bigger difference than you think. You might think that it's just there for our own vanity. It's really not. It's so that if there are recent ratings and reviews, what that does is it boosts the podcast and other people's feeds. And so it recommends it to other people. It's actually a way that just by sitting there on your phone and typing out hitting 5 stars or typing out a quick note on why you enjoy the podcast can actually get it in front of more eyes. It can actually help do an important job of getting the word out there and helping bring others into the siege, if you will. And so we want to encourage you to do that. Or if you're interested in, maybe putting some of your money where your mouth is, you can support us financially through Patreon. This is another way that you can help spread the word to the furthest ends of the Imperium.
Yeah, donating at least $1 a month will make you a patron saint. Maybe we'll call you a Fremen from now on or something.
You'll be the Fedaykin. There we go.
This gives you special access to an exclusive Siege, our Facebook group, and a channel on the Discord server. And it also allows you to vote on future episodes. So once a month we have a Patreon vote so that you can choose, and sometimes we have themes, sometimes we don't. This month's theme is sci-fi. And did we already pick this one, David?
No, but I think by the time this airs, there will probably be a vote going, but regardless, there should be votes happening no matter when you're listening to this. And so, consider supporting us, being part of that group, and then you can vote on those episodes once a month. And if there's a theme for that month, then there's going to be, it'll tie into the other episodes. Otherwise, it's kind of a free-for-all, whatever is timely, or whatever people feel like having us cover. And so, being part of that group is excellent. Here, as in Arrakis, we're all equal at Popcorn Theology. You want to be equal to us? I guess that's for you to decide. And then, you get some sweet gear. We have, what do we have? We've got stillsuits. We've got, no, we don't have anything quite like that. We do have some merchandise.
Cool. Awesome.
So, consider picking up some merch. I can't put the hat on because of the headphones, but, we've got t-shirts, we've got hats, we've got coffee mugs, we've got stickers, we've got all kinds of stuff, sandals, new stuff coming out on a semi-regular basis. And so keep an eye out in the store, and there's sales every now and then. So if you follow us on social media, we'll notify you to the sales. And once again, that's just another way to support the podcast and help us to get the word out to more people about engaging media to glorify God. So we'll put down a thumper and hitch a ride as we dig deeper into the themes of Dune Part 2.
Popcorn Theology has been mindfully viewing cinema from a godly perspective since 2015. But why? Where did it come from? Well, one of the inspirations was our host James Harleman's book, Cinemagogue, published in 2012, exploring the intersections between film and faith. And now, fresh off the press, is an updated edition of the book, the Cinemagogue Director's Cut. This version contains over 40 pages of new content with reviews and recommendations, movie references, illustrations, further shaping the story-formed argument for God's existence while also delving deeper on hot topics like how we deal with sex and nudity in film. It's the how-to guide for all things popcorn theology. And this time, it's not just available on Kindle and in paperback, but also a hardcover edition for all you true book lovers. So if you like movies, if you're a cinephile, if you spend hours talking film, this book is definitely for you. Or if you're a casual consumer who thinks movie making exists merely for diversion, this book may just change your life. Cinemagogue available now at Amazon.com. For bulk orders or signed copies, check out Cinemagogue.com for details.
Hey, this is James, and if you're listening to Popcorn Theology, it's because you're interested in movies, or theology, or best of all, both. And that probably means you're our kind of people, sharing things in common with our community, and maybe sharing common interests our listeners and viewers would be interested in as well. So why not partner with us and advertise your business or ministry right here on Popcorn Theology? We're looking for great, like-minded sponsors and offer reasonable rates with a variety of formats to get your message out. Remember, our fans aren't mindless consumers, so they'll give you thoughtful consideration. That's big part of what we're all about. So for more information on advertising with us, contact info@popcorntheology.com.
Imperial Diary, year 10,191. First comment. The advertisements were dropped, as were the spoilers, with much warning. In the shadows of Arrakis lie many secrets, but the darkest of them all may remain. why Jam only rated this as fresh. The end of mindless consumption.
Fantastic. Yeah, I called an audible there on that one.
That was great. I mean, we still like you, Jam. You're just
thank
wrong.
you. Thank you.
You're allowed to have an opinion. It's just wrong.
You're allowed to be wrong. Yeah,
I didn't realize that was in there.
Oh, you didn't see me type that? Oh,
I didn't see that, no.
Oh, very good.
I almost didn't see it. I was like, oh, wait, there's something in parentheses. Oh,
Hot takes, right? Hot takes
man.
throughout.
Hot takes.
So, all right. Well, it is time for us to get into our popcorn thoughts. And there it is. And as we do this, I also wanted to ask, because we're going to go around and talk about why we rated this film as either fresh, stale, fresh, or buttered and salted. But as we do that, I also wanted to ask, you guys mentioned having read the books, I believe. Have either of you seen the 1984 David Lynch film?
Yes, that is 2 hours of my life that I will never get back. It's an acid trip, like, for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is definitely wild. So that's a yes from Maddy and a no from Jam?
Yeah, my general rule of thumb is to stay away from the 80s. So
if there's an 80s sci-fi movie,
don't watch it.
I mean, Star Wars aside, like there's exceptions. Of course, there's exceptions.
No. I don't watch those either. I just watch the prequels and then the superior Star Wars, which is the sequels.
Oh,
James just burning all kinds of kinds of bridges over here.
I might have to leave the podcast now.
Well, in the meantime,
I got Rey and Kylo tattooed for a reason. Come on.
Oh man, fantastic.
That is a hot take right there.
Well, that puts your earlier opinion in a bit of context. So.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, that's helpful, isn't it?
Yeah. No, good to know. Well, yeah, I was just curious because I feel like it's impossible if you, especially with you guys having read the books. Or how many of the books did you guys get around
Dune.
to?
I didn't read Dune Messiah yet, but I probably will since it seems most likely that there is going to be a Dune Messiah. So I will probably read that.
There will be at least Dune Messiah.
And there's like 2 other books, I think.
There's a bunch. There's a whole bunch.
So I read Dune, and then everything I read online said, don't read the next one.
That's what
I picked up the next one, and I started and read maybe halfway through, and then I put it down and decided I wasn't going to read it anymore.
Yeah, I heard it was, weird.
I heard that advice as well, and then I ignored it because I'd already bought this. And so after the first one came out, I was just too curious. I was like, I can't wait 2 years. And I was just itching to read it. And so I picked up this 3-pack. It's got Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune, which are the first 3. Mm-hmm. There are evidently... I think 3 more main books, and then there's like another series that was like a spin-off of this. So I think there's like somewhere around 20-something books. But as far as those are the 3 that are pretty widely recognized as like the main ones. And so I finally finished Children of Dune 6 months ago, something like that. And overall, my opinion, generally, of course, Dune is incredible, fantastic book, written a bit differently, but Dune Messiah is different. It's kind of weird. It's kind of rough, but I actually liked Children of Dune quite a bit. I thought Children of Dune was quite good. And so I don't know how far they're going to go with it. I heard something about a spin-off HBO Max show, or Max, whatever we're calling it these days, show on Children of Dune. Who knows what they'll end up doing with that. Mm-hmm. But evidently there's also a sci-fi original series on on Messiah and Children of Dune, but you can't stream it anywhere. I was very frustrated by that.
Yeah, you can't find it.
Yeah. Pretty irritated. Anyway, so Jam, you thought that this was just fresh. And so why don't you go ahead and tell us why you're wrong?
We're just going to keep hammering you on this.
Let me start out by saying my name is Jam. So that should tell you every reason when I'm wrong there. No, I think narratively, as a film, it's confusing. It's my wife came in and watched it with me. She sat and watched the first one with me. She fell asleep during the first one and then never picked it up again. She didn't have any interest in picking it up. And then I told her I wanted to go see this. And she was like, do I need to watch the first one to see it? Probably not. But she was completely lost in this one as well as the first one. So like narratively, I think it does a poor job in helping its viewer to understand the entire context of what is actually going on. They don't tell you what things are. They just want you as a viewer to perceive them. And so there are scenes with Paul becoming a freeman, which could have easily been cut out or even sped up. For me, the Paul and Johnny romance, I think it fell short. The only actual exposition of plot outside of Florence Poe recapping the beginning is what made it hard for my wife to view it. I had a hard time viewing it. And so I feel like you really, really need to read the source material to have a full understanding and appreciation of the movie. I disliked some of the casting too. That's why I also called it fresh. Christopher Walken as the Emperor took me out of the movie so hardcore.
Yeah.
Same thing with Austin Butler. He's Rotha, and he played in shows like Zoe 101, Switched at Birth, Ned's Declassified, and then the Shannara Chronicles. And he's just never done it for me as an actor. And I hated the fact that then he mimicked Baron Vlad's voice. And so not only as an actor, he took me out, but the mimicking that voice, I hated it.
Very interesting you listed the things that he's acted in, and then there's a glaring omission from that.
Yeah, just
Elvis.
Yeah.
Best known as Elvis.
I didn't watch Elvis.
I've never heard of I don't think I've heard of any of those shows that you listed.
Yeah, I never had Disney Channel as a kid, so I've never actually seen him in anything except Elvis and this, I think.
Yeah.
I think that'll ruin it for you then.
He's in the new show Masters of the Air, which is actually really good.
I'd be very curious if he and Zendaya, because I know they were both Disney kids. I wonder if they were ever in I'm sure if there is, it'll be circling by the time this episode drops. As far as a gif of the two of them being like, "Hey guys,"
I think
Disney Channel doing the whole thing.
I think he was before she was on Disney. Yeah, I don't know. It just I've never. It's hard to take him seriously as an actor after seeing him in all of those. And
that's
I know
understandable.
That's pretty brutal to say, but that's why I didn't watch Elvis, because he was in it, and then that's why I'm not watching the Masters of the Air, is because he's in it. I can't take him seriously.
Wow.
But I will say, my fresh take, the positive, I thought visually it was amazing. And I actually think Star Wars could learn a whole lot from Dune, because in Star Wars you have visiting several planets, and the galaxy feels so small with the way Star Wars puts everything together. They go to one spot on the planet, and that's all it seems like that planet is. And then they go to however many other planets. Dune, you actually get to see and partake of Arrakis. You see the people, the way of life. And I think that's where they get you. And that's where they really built up the world, which is what I really enjoyed. And so for me, the galaxy, the world of Dune, it feels huge compared to Star Wars.
Yes.
I also absolutely loved the end fight scene. I thought that was excellent choreography. There was one point where he did a side flip, and I looked at my wife. I was like, that was amazing. I was on the edge of my seat.
That was really cool.
You're doing the knife fight, right?
Yeah, the knife fight at the end. I thought that was awesome. And I loved the political twist at the end of the movie. Thought that was well done with the whole I'll marry the princess kind of thing. Those parts I thought were really, really well done.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Maddy, what did you think? You thought it was buttered and salted, and so it's same sort of deal. Thoughts on the casting and all of the other visual elements. Yeah.
I think I actually agree with Jam on some of the casting. Christopher Walken did kind of take me out of it as well. Again, it's Christopher Walken. It's Christopher Walken. My best impression.
You underestimate my Sardaukar. Really, the Sardaukar. There's a fever. Arrakis has a fever, and the only prescription is more
Christopher
Sardaukar.
Walken in space. That's all we got. Christopher Walken in space.
I would like to see a behind the scenes, or maybe an SNL sketch of them filming this, and then Denis Villeneuve being like, "Cut. Okay, I need you to be less yourself. Can you be someone else? Can you do a different voice?" Because it did seem like he was toning down his Walken-ness.
He did.
But it did leak through a couple times. And I was like, when it did leak through, I was laughing.
Did you guys see the Super Bowl commercial that he was in? where everyone so it was Christopher Walken. He like goes into a restaurant and the water mimics his voice, and then he goes another place and everybody like mimics the way he talks. I even forgot what the commercial was for, but it was hilarious. That was like the one Super Bowl commercial I remember.
Oh man!
But anyway, sorry, we got sidetracked on Christopher Walken.
my bad.
but no, it was, and I feel like that sometimes these epic movies can do that, where it's like they cast these big names. Again, it's to get people in the theaters. I mean, obviously, you want more people to buy tickets, so you say, that Anna Taylor-Joy is going to be in this, even though she's only in it for like 2 seconds. At least her face, stuff like that. And there are a couple other faces that it's like very recognizable, and you're just like, but I don't know if they really needed to be that recognizable because again, their parts were so small. And I think that's it. But again, if they're going to make another movie, then these people are going to be more prominent in the next movie. So I can see why they did certain things the way they did, but I agree that sometimes it can take you out. I don't have the same problem with Austin Butler because, again, I didn't have Disney Channel as a kid. I never watched him. So I literally discovered him with Elvis. I was like, that's the first time I ever saw him. So, and I thought it was great. But I really loved this movie. I thought it was a really great piece of cinema. And again, like the visuals are amazing. Again, it's just so rare to have an epic, or we don't do epics very well anymore. And that's like my complaint with like all of recent Marvel. It's like it used to be, it had a little more gravitas to it. But now it's like all comedy. It's all just funny, lame jokes. And I can't take that. I need something to anchor me. And I thought, again, like it's long and it could, I think, get a little, I don't want to say boring because I wasn't bored, but it's just, you have to be more patient with it. But I still felt like it had more lighter moments in it than the previous one. And like they were having fun. Like, you could see him having more fun with Chani, with the Fremen, learning to do their things, learning their ways, and then Gurney would make a couple of jokes, but they were always like appropriate. So I felt like the tone was right, and I appreciated that. Again, kind of like Lord of the Rings, like it was an epic, but it also had comedic, lighter moments of hope in it. So it wasn't all just like heavy, crashing down and new stuff. And again, like just going like you mentioned, Jam, like really exploring the world and seeing those other worlds and kind of realizing how huge this galaxy is and how much like the Bene Gesserit are like in everything and like how they've planted these seeds literally everywhere. And it's fascinating to me. So it is a very like complicated story. And again, like I've read the books too, and it's even more complicated. Like I had to read like a read along guide with the book to understand like some of the things going on. And so I also, like Jam, I loved that duel between Paul and Fade. It was epic. And the choice to do no music behind it, it was all just like the sound effects were amazing in that scene. You hear every swipe of the blade, every punch impact, every breath taken almost. Like you can like hear them breathing. And it's just really impactful because throughout the whole movie, and this was with the first one too, the music is really loud most of the time, and it's really like brrr, it's just like vibrating in your seat basically. Like it's so heavy and like present all around you, and then all of a sudden it was just gone, and you were just focusing on like this duel, and it was really cool. But yes, and then just kind of going over some of the things that they skipped or changed because I have read the book. So they stayed pretty true to it. I'd have to say they skipped, changed some things again for time's sake. I do miss some of the things that they could have added in. Like Alia was already born at this point, and
a few years old. I think she was like 4 or 5 or something.
Yeah, she was older. Yeah, but she's kind of a creepy little girl because again, she could talk like right out of the womb pretty much. Like she's very intelligent for her age because of the Jessica drinking the water of life while she was pregnant with her. And one thing that I will say that I dislike about both this one and or the last one and this one part two is they almost tone down the Baron's evilness. Like when you read the books, like he is a messed up dude. Like there's some things that like I can't even say that he does like on this podcast just because it's too gross to mention. But I almost feel like Villeneuve kind of tones like there also wasn't, and again this can be a good or a bad thing, there wasn't like really any gore in this movie, which I can appreciate to an extent, but I almost wanted to see some with like Fayed and the Baron just to again get that sense of their evilness because they are that evil. Whereas I feel like it was a little whitewashed a little bit, you know, it's just kind of like, let's clean this up probably so you can get more of an audience in there. Cause I think it's rated PG-13 if I'm correct.
It is. Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have an R rating, which again, I totally get that. And, you know, you want it to be more family friendly in a sense. And I do appreciate being able to take, you know, more of your younger family members to see that kind of thing. So, and then one other thing I noticed that they changed a little bit is Chani's skepticism in this movie, and she wasn't really skeptical in the book at all. She was just kind of supporting him, so there wasn't really like a conflict there.
No, I agree for sure. The changes were, some of them made sense, I think, in a way. Like you said, they can't show too much of they alluded to some of the awful things about the Baron. I appreciated that, but yeah. And in terms of the timing, I think that really could have been, they could have expanded that and made it seem like it was years. Cause I mean, we're really, the only way that we know how long these events lasted is that Jessica is still pregnant. That's it.
Yeah.
For me, at least, that's the only way that I know how long it has been.
Yeah.
And
it was
that I thought was a strange choice. Yeah, it was a lot longer, and it felt longer. I mean, to the point. If you're worried about spoilers for this book, skip ahead like 30 seconds or a minute. Not only is Alia born and a few years old, by this point, Paul and Chani have had a child. They've gotten married and had one child at this point. And yet another spoiler: the child doesn't make it. In terms of the whole story. It's heartbreaking. And I'm not surprised they changed that part of it, but I was definitely surprised that they didn't even have Alia be born. That being said, this is where, you know, if you compare it to the 1984 Dune, what they tried to do was stay kind of more faithful to how Alia was, and it was creepy. So I get it. Because they had they didn't have her, they had a little girl stand there and mouth, and a creepy witch voice lady did the voice, which is totally book accurate. But then they also didn't have her.
Super strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Also another difference, and skip ahead 30 seconds or a minute if you don't want to hear spoilers. Some people are, worried about that. It's like, well, this book was out in the 60s, so,
you've had time.
But it's actually Alia who kills the Baron. It's not Paul.
Yeah.
And in the 84 movie, they didn't have her kill him. They had kicked him into space and the worm ate him.
Yeah.
And then in this one, Paul kills him, which makes more sense than the other. And I get in both cases, you don't want to see a young child kill an old man. Totally get it.
It's very, jarring.
Yes. But also the other thing is that we call her a child. And as they explain in the books, she's not really a kid. She's just in a kid's body. There's eons of former reverend mothers inside her consciousness. It's crazy stuff. And so some of the changes I understand, but it was surprising to have her not be born. But there's been some great talk in the chat, by the way, during the live recording here. Miles and Joshua bringing up that this movie illustrates people talking to a fetus in the womb. And it's very, very cool. And there's, in this case, talking back, which is unusual. But regardless, it's definitely some quite pro-life messaging. And for a movie that came out in 2024, that's it's pretty cool. One thing I'll mention as well, in terms of the buttered and salted, which is the rating I gave it, I thought this movie had a strange timeliness to it for something that doesn't neatly fit into the points that we're going to get into later, which is the entire world of Dune. And this is very subtle in these movies, but in the book, it's very overt. The entire world is existing thousands and thousands of years after a war that has taken place against the machines. And it was in order to destroy machines that were made in man's likeness. So one way to look at it, and I'm sure James could easily point out why this is an inadequate description, but it would be kind of like if we won the war preceding the Matrix, if humans actually won that war.
Yeah.
So in the Matrix, there was a war with the machines, we lost, and there we are. In this case, it became, we're trying to keep machines from doing things that humans should be able to do. And for that matter, humans are replacing machines. You see some of that with the Harkonnens. They're standing around that big map and they're chanting, and they're basically mentats. They're human computers. And they didn't do the mentat thing as well as I kind of would have liked.
No.
The book really gets into a lot more of that.
They never really explain what a mentat is. So
Or anything else.
Jim was like, I was right.
but at least in the first one, they show I forget his name, the mentat for Howat. Thank you. Yeah. They show him like
computing
calculation. He kind of computes, and so you kind of can piece some of the pieces together. But I will say that's another huge difference with the 1984 Dune. It was so visually weird, but still everyone looked the same. Like I was watching it and I was like, okay, so that's a Harkonnen, that's an Atreides, that's a Fremen. They look the same.
Tell.
Like the only way you can tell who is who is the Harkonnens were gingers. Like they were gingers and they wore green. I think there may have been some subtle anti-Irish, stuff going on in that movie. Just throwing that out there. And then the green didn't even make sense with that because green is supposed to be an Atreides color. But everyone looked the same. They all had like the same like 70s, 80s hairdo, beard combination. It was weird. The visual, but anyway, all that to say, what that movie failed at visually, Villeneuve's movie excelled at, which is that everything was stark and visually compelling and different. Every group, you could tell who was who, even though there were basically no Atreides left at this point. You could still tell for those that were there, they were noble. They had, and the other thing that's interesting, they're of mixed ethnicities in this story, pretty much in each one of the houses, except the Harkonnens. And that still works because there's still a visual feature that helps to set them apart. They still dress similarly or act similarly. But anyway, this is a movie I was very highly anticipating. It was actually the first film I'd seen in theaters in about 11 months, which for me is an eternity to go between movies. I saw D&D and then Super Mario Brothers, and we recorded on those. And then life has been crazy. So I've been kind of counting down to this one. But the music was fantastic. The cast was great. Keep seeing more and more people in the cast and saying, oh, right, they were in such and such. But very, very different feel. And what I loved about it was that it didn't feel like it was just more of part one. It actually felt like a genuinely different movie in the same universe and the same storyline, which considering it picks up seconds after the last one left off, it really seems like there should be, it shouldn't be as good at that as it is. So anyway, fantastic.
I agree.
Any other popcorn thoughts before we get into the theology? All right. Well, in that case, we shall drink deeply, pour and sample some of the spiritual aspects of this film and its narrative. And so we're going to shift gears and discuss the themes of Dune Part 2. And the music's not working. That's fine.
I wish I had a glass of blue Gatorade that looked like the water of life. I should have done that.
And then you just have to pretend to like choke on it. Like,
I just die here on the floor.
It's toxic for men. Awkward. All right. Well, I'll put that in post. This will be a fun one to edit. I have no idea why it's not working.
Are you talking about the soda sound?
Yeah, it was supposed to do a soda sound. Did y'all hear it?
It just played.
I heard it. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad
but
you guys
didn't
heard
hear it.
Nope,
Yeah.
that's okay.
That happened to me on the last podcast where I couldn't hear any of the sound effects. Remember?
I think that sounds familiar. It also
I had
keeps
to
popping
refresh
up
the page.
on my screen. It keeps popping up saying having connection issues. It's been doing that like half of the time we've been recording. So if I lose you again, I'll refresh. Sorry about all this, guys.
Okay, no, you're good.
Okay, so I think I said all the intro stuff, and so we'll kick it over to Jam. So Jam, tell us, what was your big takeaway theme from this movie? Even though Again, not your favorite of the Dune, or I guess it was your favorite of the Dune movies, but still not
yeah.
your
It's
favorite
still fresh.
rendition of
It's
a
not
story.
bad.
Still fresh.
It's not bad.
Right.
No,
A movie has to be either great or terrible.
yeah, there's no in between anymore.
This is true.
Yeah, my theme is echoes of Christ. I think there are clear echoes of Christ throughout the entirety of Dune. A lot of that has to do with Frank Herbert, who was influenced heavily by many different religions, Islam, Buddhism, even Catholicism. And what's cool is you see Paul is thrust into the prophecy about being the one who's going to bring the people of Arrakis into the promised land. And then that's going to be causing the desert planet and to turn into a lush, green, thriving oasis with springs of water. And Paul is supposedly going to be doing this by removing the heel of the Corino Empire off of their necks and to restore the Fremen back to the way of life that they once had. And throughout the movie, Paul is struggling because he doesn't believe himself to be the Muad'Dib, but his mother and his sister from inside the womb and the entirety of the Fremen of the South, they believe he is. And so ultimately, it's not a perfect parallel because Christ did not claim that he was not the Messiah. He actually teaches the opposite. He teaches he is the Messiah. One thing I will note as an apologetic against Islam is, and that's just simply because of how influential that religion is to this movie. Jesus was not just a prophet who did the will of Allah. Jesus was God. And so one major difference between Paul and Jesus, outside of their very essence, is the fact that Paul did not believe he was the Messiah, but Jesus taught from a very early age, from the scroll of Isaiah, that he was the one whom Isaiah prophesied about. And so there are tons of echoes. I'm just going to lightning round these off, and then I'll ask you guys if you found any allusions back to Christ. And so the first one is the water of life that Paul drinks. No man is supposed to be able to live from it, but he is resurrected from the desert spring. And so that reminds me of John 4. Jesus tells the woman at the well that from him springs of living water will come. And so that anyone who drinks will never be thirsty again. Ultimately, Paul's resurrection will bring about the spring of water for the Fremen. We could talk about the resurrection, which is very clearly an echo of Christ. Jesus says, I am the resurrection of the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though he dies. And so that's John 11:25. Ultimately, this death brings about the reality that Paul needs to fight and to take on the mantle of Muad'Dib, to bring life back to the Fremen. Freedom is such a huge theme in this. Think of the Apostle Paul. For freedom, Christ has set us free. That's Galatians 5:1. And so ultimately the motivation of Paul is freedom for the Fremen. That is why he is willing to leverage political marriage to bring about peace and freedom to Arrakis. But ultimately we know Jesus brings us true freedom. I thought of John 15, for example. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I've called you friends. For all that I've heard from my Father, I've made known to you. I thought about this in two parts. Paul is plagued by dreams, and he works through those with Chani, who claims it is because he has been exposed to spice. But these dreams then get communicated, and he says he can't go south. He still tells Stilgar that. And so he doesn't want to go south out of fear of everyone that he loves dying. And so many times we see Jesus claim it wasn't his time, or the gospel writers will note his hour had not yet come. And so Paul has this knowledge about him that is supernatural, that we see Jesus actually does. And what's cool is Jesus shares his knowledge with his disciples, and Jesus says, no longer do I call you servants, I call you friends. Then I thought of the triumphant entry. So when Paul finally does go south, he walks right into the temple, and everyone kind of just parts the way for him. And it reminded me, one, of the triumphant entry, but then also Jesus flipping tables. And so he is so unlike what they expected. Jesus is. He's just so unlike what they expected. What's interesting is what we see in Paul, which is like this warrior Messiah, is exactly what the Jews expected Jesus to be.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus was the exact opposite. And that's why so many people discredited Jesus from being the Messiah. Imagine if, like, the whole story of Dune, Paul was actually more like Jesus in the fact that he wasn't a warrior, but that he had to quite literally lay down his life. Like, you couldn't get away from the gospel parallel there. But it made me think of those two, the triumphal entry and the temple, because Paul is supposed to kill Stilgar in order to speak. And then he breaks that religious cultural tradition and then starts flipping it on its head. And then Paul actually makes an I am statement there, and he's fully noting who he is in the middle of all those people, and then they all start worshiping him. And then it made me think Jesus' triumphal entry, Palm Sunday, they're all crying out, Hosanna on the highest. And once Paul makes his I am statement, that's what all the crowd is doing at that point. They start worshiping him. And you also see that divine knowledge, right? Paul walks up and tells that individual, this is what happened. This is how it happened. And then everyone falls on their faces. Jesus does that so many times throughout the Gospels. He tells people, he has this knowledge of people. You even think of like individuals coming into him for healing and Jesus not even being present with them, but then they're healed and says, go, they are healed, right? So we see those kind of things. And the last one I'll shoot off, the wedding of an enemy is very Romans 5. Of course, Paul is doing this for political gain. He tells the emperor that he will take the hand of his daughter and the crown, and he is offering to care for her and to protect her. Jesus lays down his life, uniting us to him by his blood to secure for us peace. And he is now seated at the right hand of the Father. Paul, marrying the princess, would then be seated because his work is completed. He would then be the emperor ruling over and finally having freed the Fremen from their bondage and captivity to their overlords, which is ultimately what Jesus does for us with sin and death. He frees us from sin and death and unites us to him by his blood. Those are echoes of Christ, man. There are so many more. Did you guys pick up on any that I didn't list?
It's a pretty thorough list. I'll throw one out there, though. I think that, and I believe you didn't mention this, but that he had to come from another world, right? That he descended, and so he wasn't. You know, and even in this movie, they make it clear you're not Fremen. Yeah. He's like, yeah, I am, and they're like, not by blood, you know. And so in his case, well, one, that he came from another earth, and that there were prophecies about him that he was fulfilling. He came to their, when he put the still suit on, they said, "Oh, you put it on the right way. How did you know to do that? He will
right.
learn your ways as if born to them." It seems similar in some ways to this. Regularly fulfilling those prophecies over and over again. And so, that would be one. And I'm not quite sure how this one ties in, but kind of having dual heritage. Well, actually, I think I do know how this fits in. So Jesus was of the line of David, right? And so he was of the line and lineage of King David. And so by his birth, he had a right to the throne. He didn't take that right to the throne because he knew that there was an eternal throne, because he had a different lineage. And so the lineage that Christ had was through both sides. Similarly, Paul has a dual lineage. And I'm sorry if I said that was about Paul. I apologize. I'm getting my words mixed up. But Paul has a dual lineage of being both a Bene Gesserit and a duke, right? And so he's got these kind of dual responsibilities of being expected to be the Kwisatz Haderach and the Lisan al-Gaib. And so those are the Bene Gesserit and the Fremen versions of, Fremen would call him a Messiah. The Bene Gesserit would say, like, oh, he's a very valuable tool for us to use. We'll talk about them later because they're a hot mess. But for anyone who's lost on all these terms and you're listening, sorry, it's Herbert just loved to give multiple names to everything.
Yeah.
This is another similarity.
Yeah,
right?
Just look it up on Google or something.
One great thing is a lot of the books have a dictionary in the back. Like this one actually has like a couple hundred pages of dictionary in the back. I'm like,
and you need it.
I wish more books had that.
Yes, you do.
And you probably do want to read it at some point. But anyway, another thing is having multiple names, right? So when you talk about Jesus, it says his name shall be Emmanuel. Well, who's Emmanuel? No one ever calls him that. Well, it means God with us. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. These are descriptions of him. But, we call him Jesus Christ. We call him the Messiah. Those are the Greek and Hebrew terms. Similarly, there's Maddy. There's Lisan al-Gaib, as we mentioned, and then he had like multiple personal names in the story too. And so, yeah, parts of it was just they couldn't settle on a name, and so they gave him a bunch. Anyway,
Well, and Jesus gives himself titles. He has 7 different I am statements in the book of John. And so even that, the significance of him finding his own name, was it the kangaroo mouse, the desert mouse, and then
Muad'Dib.
and then Stilgar is like, no, that's the perfect name for you. Jesus so many times within his I am statements is telling us something about himself, and that's the significance then with the desert mouse. It's telling us something about Paul too, so that the names are good. And then you're talking about him coming from another world. It makes me think of Hebrews. We have a great high priest who is able to sympathize with us in all of our weaknesses. Without Jesus coming and living the life we could not, right? We would not be able to say we have a high priest who can sympathize. And the priest, of course, being the one that goes to God on behalf of the people, right? Like the fact that he came to us and lived out the life, that's significant there too.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and he had to live among the Fremen to know their struggle, really.
Yeah.
And that also parallels it.
He was tried and he was tested in every way that they were, right? They said, go walk across that thing, make sure you can cross the desert, make sure that you can ride a sandworm, do all that stuff. Yeah. Similarly, Christ was tried and tested in every way that we are, yet without sin.
Yeah,
so, absolutely.
Fantastic. Awesome. So if there's no other points on that, we'll move over to Maddy. Maddy, what was one of the big themes that stood out to you?
Yeah, so mine kind of is rolling off Jam's point. He's talking about all the positive parallels. I'm going to do the opposite. We're going to talk about all the negative.
Now it's your turn to be salty,
so
right?
Fun. Yeah, now I get to be the salty one. But honestly, the main thing that stood out to me is this idea of like false prophets and holy war, like jihad. And so as we already kind of talked about, Paul is this prophet figure, right? And the main imagery and story that I thought of while watching this was Jesus' temptation in the wilderness when he goes into the desert to be tempted. And I'm like, Paul is kind of going through this as well. But I believe where Jesus, Paul failed in his temptations. I believe that he submits to the devil and the powers and principalities of the world. So in Matthew 4:8-11, the devil takes him to a very high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms and all their glory, and he says to them, all these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me. But Jesus said, begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and only him shall you serve. And the devil left him, and the angels came and ministered to him. And Paul, I think, goes in the desert and does the complete opposite. He's tempted, and he realizes all this power that he could have, and he takes it. Because before he's tempted, he thinks of freeing the Fremen. He wants to allow the transformation of Arrakis into a paradise. He wants to avenge his father. But he also wants to be with Chani. I'll love you as long as I breathe. And the only plan was really to survive. But throughout the course of the movie, you can see that changes. And others kind of tell him to do so, even, including his mother. So instead of freeing the Fremen, he decides to use them to wage war in his name. And then he wants revenge upon all his enemies. He wants to make himself basically the known ruler of this world and align himself politically and religiously among the leaders of the Fremen, and marrying Princess Irulan, those plans within plans that they're always talking about in these movies. And he kind of ends up meeting cruelty with cruelty. And again, like, I love this movie. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad movie if people are getting that vibe, because obviously I said it was buttered and salted, so I love it. It's kind of like the Godfather trilogy in a way. It's like, the main character is a bad guy, but you like him anyway. He's still the protagonist, so you're kind of like hoping at some point he's going to get redemption, even though he probably never will. But yeah, it's like this, because Paul wants to conquer the world basically in this, and Paul and Jessica and the Bene Gesserit teachings, they're creating this myth, and they even admit to that. Like, they've sowed the seeds among these people. Like, they've been telling them to, and that's to save themselves in case anything would ever happen. And even Gurney sees that they've kind of created this legend of fear. And Paul says, well, resources are limited, fear is all we have. And Gurney encourages his use of the Fremen as soldiers for revenge. He tells them, like, why not be the prophet? Be the prophet. Use these guys to win this war because they can. And that just made me think, like, well, then how does this make Paul any different from Fade Routha or even the Bene Gesserit? They're all just lying and scheming to make their own way in this world. They're plans within plans. And they think that they can change the future with their own skills and intelligence. And I love that line from the Reverend Mother, because I think Princess Irulan had said, well, what do we have? Do we have any hope? And she said, we don't hope, we plan. They guide and direct everything. And so their goal is to make this world their kingdom. And that's all of them: Paul, Jessica, the Bene Gesserit, the Baron. And it kind of brings up this idea and what we see in jihad versus just war, and this like conversion versus compulsion sort of thing, using civil authority to bear the sword in the name of religion. And the quote is, the power to destroy a thing is the absolute control over it. But again, contrasting that with Jesus, in John 18:36, Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. And again, like Jam said earlier, the Jews were almost mad at him because he wasn't a warrior. He wasn't taking down the government and kicking butts and taking names. He was the opposite of that. He was bringing peace. And this contrasts with, this is from the Quran, it's from Surah 929, and this is basically what I believe Paul is doing. It says, fight against those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and his messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth, Islam, from those who are given the scripture. Fight until they give the jizya, which is like a tax that they would impose over the countries that they had taken over, willingly while they are humbled. So it's more, again, forceful. It's this compulsion. And so Paul is kind of using that method, you really see it at the end, to gain control in both the civil and religious spheres, to gain power and use them. So, and that's like when he declares war on the houses, when they don't side with him after he defeats Fayed, he's like, no, everyone will accept me as emperor. I will be the king of this universe. And I also, I think Miles had mentioned in the chat earlier, Christ parallels with when he was telling everyone what was in their minds at that meeting that they had. But again, the difference that I saw was that he was using that to manipulate them, because he knows he's not a Messiah. Like he said it, like Jam mentioned earlier. Jesus always knew he was Messiah. Paul said he wasn't, and then all of a sudden he decided that that was the best course of action for him. And so he's telling these people all these things to make them think that he is this thing. And he's like, okay, now I have them. All right, let's go attack, the emperor. We're going to take him over. And there's a lot of verses that speak about these like false prophets and how they manipulate people. And in Jeremiah, in several verses, it's like they speak visions of their own minds, the deceit of their own minds. And like in 2 Timothy, with the itching ears, like they'll wander off into myths. And in Romans 16, it's their own appetites, and by smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. And so it just really made me think of Colossians 2:8, see it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition. And not according to Christ. Everything should point back to Christ, which there's not really a God figure in this movie. Like, they're kind of portraying humans as becoming these godlike figures. And that's kind of what Paul is, but he's not big God, he's not God. And so I really think, as Christians, when we're watching these type of movies, like I love this movie. It's great. It's a great story. It's epic. It's really fun. But I think, you also got to be careful in telling people like Paul is a Messiah figure. And it's like, ooh, like Paul's not as Rory said on Facebook, I think he said, is Paul a Messiah or is he a very naughty boy? And I think he's a very naughty boy. So, if you're trying to like tell somebody about this movie and say that Paul is like Christ, I would caveat it with saying like, but he's really a false prophet, to be honest. Like he shouldn't be the Messiah figure you're looking up to and worshiping. So it's not really a flattering picture of religion in a sense. It's how religion can be manipulated.
That's interesting. One thing I'm a little unclear on, because even having read the books, as you guys know, the books are dense. There's a lot of layers on layers, and you're getting one person's perspective, not necessarily the truth in any given moment. There's no omniscient narrator who's giving you stuff. You actually see into different people's heads in the book. I guess it depends on how we define Messiah, right? Yeah. He's not sent of a father. No question. He's not aligned with the biblical idea of a Messiah. But I was still under the impression, even watching this movie, and more so in the book, but even watching this movie, that he kind of was what the Fremen thought he was going to be. Maybe their expectations were off, but he was, I was, and maybe I'm mistaken about that, but I thought that it was a matter of he did have the abilities that they thought he would have. He did have the capacities. And so I guess I don't know. I'm curious, Jam, what your take was on that. Was he actually the Messiah and he just ended up using it for ill intent? Because that's kind of the way I interpreted it, but I'm
that's
ready to be told I'm wrong.
That's 100% how I've understood it too. The drinking of the water, I think, was what, for lack of a better term, opened his mind to then recognizing. And so it's almost, there's a mention of Chani says something about being exposed to the spices, and he's talking about having more vivid dreams with the spices. But then once he drinks the water, he can see clearly. And that's what he's been saying. He can see clearly. Now, whether or not he takes on the I am statement and then becomes the Messiah for only the purpose of, I want to get all of this, or because he has a self-recognition of, oh no, I am the Messiah. I'm not quite sure. When I watched it, it seemed the latter. It seemed like it was him. I am the Messiah. So now I need to actually live this out. Now, there certainly could have been selfish. It does seem like there are selfish motives, right? When he's like, no, I'm going to be the emperor of all of it. But I thought it was more of him coming into, he disbelieved originally. The waters helped him see, kind of like his sister. His sister was more aware and could see things, and she's taking on the Bene Gesserit, Reverend Mother. And that's kind of what I thought was happening with the water, is it's kind of awakened into that.
Yeah. It's weird because I always got the impression from the book that, and again, maybe, it's been a little while since I read it, but I still felt like I got the impression that it wasn't like he was a real Messiah. It was only because, basically, for lack of better terms, science-y stuff, the Bene Gesserit breeding program that made him this basically smart enough to be able to do that. Like, there's nothing like supernatural about it. It's just that they bred humans right, and now we can see into the future and read minds. And it didn't have anything to do with like him being like an actual Messiah figure. Plus, again, the Bene Gesserit have been sowing these legends. It's not like the religion came about like from an actual, like God gave us.
There's no revelation.
His word. Yeah, there's no revelations. Like, it seems like the Fremen have all of their religious nuggets from the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that's been fed down to them. What's interesting is Paul, without any understanding of those prophecies, does fulfill those prophecies. And then he starts to gain more understanding of the prophecies and whether or not he's purposely intending to do it. But even think about like the scene in the movie where he's trying to do desert walking, and then Chani comes up and says he's basically dumb, like he needs to change his rhythm, and then they're doing it differently. He's learning their ways, which is fulfilling another part of the prophecy. The naming, Stilgar, and the naming, like that seems to be very significant to the prophecy. And so I would even argue the fact that the Bene Gesserit are breeding humans in such a way that they can do things like that is still supernatural. It's not natural to the Bene Gesserit, but it is supernatural to the Fremen. The Fremen can't do that. So you still have a section or a reality that he is a part of now that is fulfilling, intentionally or non-intentionally, the prophecies that have been fed to them. I guess that's when you get into the question of prophecy itself, and then the question of Messiah itself. What are the qualifiers of a prophecy and a Messiah? Paul seems to meet all of the things that he needs to meet in order to be the Messiah that fulfills the prophecy. Whether or not that prophecy is true, then that gets into your point, right, Maddy, of false prophets. And that's basically my question, is like the whole like prophecies in general seem, Miles had a really good, where did he say that? The missionaries are portrayed as multi-generational propagandists to place prophecies that they themselves work to fulfill. And that was basically my thought when reading the books as well. It's like they're just doing this to make themselves look like gods, not that they actually are, but...
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense. So if I can put a bow on this, and I'm sorry to listeners for whom this is already clear, I was sure lost, even having read the book. It seems like he is fulfilling the prophecies, but the prophecies were planted by the Bene Gesserit, and the only reason he could do the things that at least the Fremen would consider supernatural is because it's all Bene Gesserit stuff. Which makes sense, because the way the Bene Gesserit work in the books, and it's a lot more clear than in the movies, they figure out what people are thinking, not because they can supernaturally read minds, but because they can analyze. They're like supermentats. We talked about human computers earlier. That's really where it all does kind of come back to this war against technology. Herbert's world is very anti-technology. For sci-fi, it's very unusual.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but yeah.
And so what they're doing is, they'll say, and especially in the first one, there's such great interaction between Jessica and Yue, so the betrayer, because she figures out he's hiding something, and he knows she's going to figure it out, so he has to throw her off the scent with a false lie, a separate thing, to make her think that she's onto it, and he does it effectively. But regardless, she's figuring out that something's up, not because she can read his mind, but because she can read his heart rate, his breathing, his tenor. It's all analytical. And so maybe that's kind of what we're seeing with Paul. But I guess the difference is that the Kwisatz Haderach can actually see the future. And that seems like a step beyond. And one wild thing about this movie, they don't show that. Did you guys notice? They don't show him seeing the future, except that vision that he sees Alia. No, right, Alia, the sister. Otherwise, we don't get to look at that, which I thought was really weird, because the first movie, there's all these visions.
They showed him.
Did I miss something?
They showed him in the south with the dead bodies. He says, "If I go south, everyone's going to die," and he had a vision of that.
But by the time he takes the water, we don't get to see. And at that point, he's actually supposed to have it. I don't know. Maybe they cut it out it's probably on the cutting room floor, and there's an edition out there that shows all of it, because he basically, if I remember correctly from the book, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, when he walks into a situation, he knows how it's going to play out. Like, he knows exactly how the duel with Fade Rautha is going to go, because he's watched it over and over again. So even if he gets injured, he knows that injury is going to happen. He's not surprised by anything. And they really elaborate on that more in the books. So he actually is prescient. But the reason he's prescient isn't because he's God or because he has a connection to a God. There's no God in this universe. That has made his presence known to anyone, at least. And so it's all basically the witches, right? The Bene Gesserit are essentially witches. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. That was quite a tangent, but I think it was an important one, at least for me, to understand. Because, we're disagreeing over whether he's the Messiah or not. And it's like, well, certainly not the Jesus Messiah, right? And certainly not even.
Yeah. It's a long movie.
3 hours long. Nope, we're here,
Nope.
man. Hey, if we've not hit 3 hours on this episode, are we doing it right?
I mean, yeah, we could probably talk for 3 hours. I mean, I could probably talk for 3 hours just about the Bene Gesserit alone.
Yeah,
like they're just
that would be fun.
Their hand is in everything. Now we lost
him.
There he
goes. There he goes.
Well, now we can talk about the Bene Gesserit for 3 hours.
Let's do it. I think the Bene Gesserit were based off of Catholicism. I think they're supposed to be like the nun kind of figure.
But really smart, super sciencey nuns with very dark political intentions.
Yes.
Not like the humble nun. Yeah. Again, I can see why they're called witches. But like David said, it's like I never thought about it. I love that he said that. It's like it's almost very anti-science or anti-technology, not anti-science, anti-technology in a sci-fi movie, which is really strange. Mm-hmm. And they're very much pro-science, but only for humans. So it's like we've made humans have these super big brains to order to
most of that's because of the war, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like basically like they killed AI. They're like, no, we can't have that.
We might need to.
I'm sorry
up on that.
Sorry about that. All right. As soon as I get going, it cut out. So, all right, I'll just jump back in, figure it out. All right. And so that brings me to my last point, and we'll try and get through this pretty quickly for the sake of time. And that is that the belief informs practice, or, some would say that orthodoxy informs orthopraxy, if you want to use the theological terms for it. But basically, the way we see the world and what we believe about the world informs how we will behave, what our values will be, and how we will treat people. And in this story, we get all of these layers in terms of the different people and players involved, including some that aren't mentioned. One thing I was surprised by, there's still very little exploration of the Chome Company or of the Spacing Guild. I get why they why they didn't focus on them, and it works out really well for this point. But I'm just kind of surprised at some of the stuff that was omitted. But in the case of the Atreides, right, we get a very honor and duty bound culture, and especially with Leto. Leto Atreides is a man of honor. Everyone respects. In fact, even the people who killed him said that it was because he was honorable, like almost literally.
It's a terrible reason.
Right, exactly. I mean, and so they placed value in life, at least initially. And, even Jessica said, well, your father, referring to Leto, your father didn't believe in revenge. And of course, that's not how Paul sees things. This is, well, I do. And to the point even where, if you recall from part 1, that Leto is reluctant to kill for Yue. He says, no, I'm not going to do it. Even though these are his enemies. It's definitely wild. But this works its way out in practice because they value life over profit. Certainly Leto does. That he, when they're faced with the loss of the spice, he says, forget the spice. Basically, get the men out of there. They trained for war, but they fought for peace. And then furthermore, they had a willingness to ally with the Fremen, right? They didn't view them as rats. They didn't view them as scum or as enemies or subjects. He viewed them as a resource, as somebody to form a good relationship with. And the emperor even says that the reason that he killed Leto was because he was weak, right? He said it was because He ruled with the heart, but that's why I killed him. But the heart was never meant to rule. And there's an element of that I can agree with, right? Heart is wicked above all things. But he says that because he valued life, that was that he didn't deserve to be a leader anymore. And that stands in stark contrast, right? And so if we were to just do a run through, the Atreides value honor and duty, whereas the Harkonnens really just value greed and cruelty. On the other hand, the Fremen, they hold out for faith in a future redemption of their planet. And so they behave in such a way that's consistent with that. Meanwhile, the Bene Gesserit behind the scenes, pulling all the strings, they just believe in control and pragmatism, right? They're just trying to manage everything. And so those are kind of the four takeaways of how these different views work. And in practice, what that results in is that the Atreides value life, they care for people, and they, at least before they were all massacred, were the only honorable people. And by the time they're gone, we're left kind of with no one really who's all that honorable, even Paul, right? As we've alluded to, Paul is conflicted. But the Harkonnens, to the far end of that, don't really seem to have any beliefs at all. They just value profit. They just value themselves. There's reference to honor and shame, but it seems like it was mostly just based around strength. Who's the strongest? It really seemed to resemble some ancient pagan cultures that don't care about what was right. They just cared about who was the strongest. And so, of course, it was brutal, psychotic at times. I mean, we get a very strong imagery of that, I would say, in part 2, more so than part 1. But then we have, like I said, the Fremen have this faith in a future redemption. And even that faith is something that Chani mocks early in the movie. She said, tell people there's a Messiah and they'll wait for centuries. They've waited for this Lisan al-Gaib, this Messiah of theirs, and that he's going to lead them into this paradise. And so as a result, they have fiercely defended their land and their spice, and they have sacrificed and stored up treasure for that future paradise. The water that they store would, in the first movie, they count the number of lives that are needed to support these sacred trees, right? There's these trees. And this giant body of water underground, there's so much there, right? It would have saved so many lives, but they won't touch it. And then it just goes to waste. But then the Bene Gesserit, they believe mankind can and should be controlled and just needs guidance behind the scenes. And so, to the point where they even say, there's even discussion between Paul and Jessica, we gave him something to hope for. He says that's not hope, right?
Yeah.
And in addition to that, they don't really even have that much confidence in some of their own plans. They think Paul's probably the Kwisatz Haderach, but they have another backup, right? And so they have another route that they're going, it could be Fade Routha instead. It could be all of this stuff. They're really just concerned with who they can control, no matter how brutal they are. And so I think that the main verse that jumps out to me about this is a passage in Matthew 12, 33 through 37. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak of good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of the good treasure brings forth good, but the evil person out of the evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. And so in this passage, we see a lot of value, a lot placed on the words that we speak. But of course, our actions are similar, right? We're going to be held accountable for our actions as well as our words. And certainly out of the abundance of our heart, we act. And so I think that it's very... it's just telling. If we really dissect the underlying values and priorities of each of these groups, we see that they're acting out their different beliefs. And the big thing about this story is that the beliefs are not, the concern isn't over whether or not they are true, right? And the guys in the chat have been saying this too. There's a lot of discussion over how religion is used, not whether it is true or not. And that's really the biggest thing we see, especially with the Bene Gesserit. They are manipulators of religion. And it would appear that the Fremen are the ones being manipulated, more so than anyone else. So I don't know. There's certainly a lot to that, but the big takeaway was that belief informs practice. Did that jump out to you guys? Are there any other examples that speak to that?
I think with the Fremen, it's very obvious. You have the scene where Jessica goes in to drink the water, and she comes out, and essentially she's alive again. And then what you have is Strickland and all of his people are like bowing down, worshiping, and then you have Zendaya's character like kind of angry, like disbelieving that whole thing.
We had the millennials over there, right?
Yeah,
Gen Z.
Yeah,
but I think that's telling of our culture too. One thing I was thinking of specifically in those scenes where it's talking about the Fremen's faith is I was asking, is that how the world looks at Christians? Because I feel like they set up those characters to almost be idiots, for lack of a better term. Like they want you to think of them that way. But we see that exactly what they believe is what they are willing to die and fight for. And that's actually when we get into our receive and reject, one of the things I think that's worth receiving is Christ is worth dying for. But like you see throughout the rest of the movie, there is not a basis of objective truth that anyone's actually standing on outside of the Fremen. The Fremen see it as objective truth, and that's why I would actually argue for Paul as a Messiah and fulfilling that Messiah, because all of their prophecies are coming true with Paul, and they're living in such a way that you're seeing that happen. It almost seems like that's the objective reality, and then everyone else is just trying to play subjectively at it. Even with the Bene Gesserit, right? They're saying, well, we're the ones that put it all together. But then the reality is they have backup plans and backup plans and backup plans because they don't know if Paul will actually be it. So it does seem like the Fremen have the objective reality here, and everything else is just subjective. And I think that's one of the things when you're talking about beliefs informing practice. Right now for the Christian school I teach at, I oversee chapel, and we're going through the Gospel of John and the sermon series, the heart of belief. And so every single week I'm encouraging the kids, if you say you're a Christian, this should naturally produce fruit. And we just went through John 15. Well, John 15, Jesus is saying, abide in me. He says that over and over. And then he says, abide in me and in my word. And so then he gets at the fruit that is born through abiding. Well, we can't abide in Jesus on our own. We need Jesus to help us to abide. He just said that in John 14. But then we also can't fulfill abiding in the word on its own. So we can't practice the faith without the help of Jesus. And then on top of that, we're told that the Father is going to prune us as we're abiding. So he's going to be helping us look more and more like Jesus. All of those culminate in the fact that Jesus is the only means by which we can abide. And so Jesus seems to be giving the command, abide in me, be in me, believe in me, and then do what I command of you. But the reality is we can't believe in Jesus apart from grace and the awakening of the Holy Spirit. And we can't abide in the law apart from grace. And even James says the good that we want to do, we can't do. James, that's Paul. But James goes on to say, if we try to keep the law, right, we will be crushed under all of it if we break any part of it. And so belief informing orthopraxy, the big thing that we've been trying to get at in chapel is like, you're going to fail, but you need Jesus. And you need to recognize you need Jesus because you're going to fail. And so live in light of that. And I think that's what the Fremen are seeing. Like they have that objective reality. They have that Messiah figure who is going to help them. And everyone else is just kind of figuring it out as they go.
Yeah.
So it seems like if we were to say, did the Bene Gesserit orchestrate all of it? Yes, but perhaps to a degree, yes. But perhaps what's happening is similar to a line of dialogue between the Emperor and Irulan, where she says, you underestimate the power of faith. And then, later, even they're talking about the value of a prophet, even if the prophet is dead. I think that there may be something to
we
this.
Can't kill him because then he'll become more powerful, basically.
Right. And so, which is very true, and even in a false prophet scenario, to make a martyr of someone. But in this case, I think that you might be right that the Bene Gesserit had orchestrated all of this, and it essentially worked all according to their plan, except the Fremen. The Fremen threw a giant wrench into it because they actually had this hope for Messiah, and then they provided the firepower behind all of it. And so, was he their Messiah? Not in a supernatural way, but in a Bene Gesserit orchestrated way. And then that ended up, in a sense, being the undoing of the Bene Gesserit, sort of. We won't get into what happens in the future books. Or is it? Right? And so there's so much more to that. Which, speaking of which, we should wrap up. And so now is a good time for the lightning round. And so, before we wrap the episode, we're going to see what themes we can sift in a little quick game of receive, reject, and redeem. And so we're just going to try and rapid fire through these things that we should thoughtfully reject that are illustrated in this film or that are perhaps valued in this film. So we'll do the reject first. And so, Maddy, what do you got?
So we kind of were talking about a little bit, but basically evolution versus the supernatural. So again, in the book and in this movie, it's basically saying that this is because of breeding and the properties of psychoactive drugs, like the spice that Paul and Aaliyah Atreides have, these abilities, and they are the way that they are. But we believe that our God actually uses the supernatural to accomplish his will. He really does know all things, and he really did perform miracles that defied science, like healing and resurrection. As Christians, if we don't have a supernatural resurrection, we don't have a gospel. We reject explaining away miracles with science and human invention, unlike this story. So we live in a world where there are it is a spiritual world that has demons and angels. So, quick thing on that.
Nice. Jam?
I have two thoughts. One is we don't need to wait around for a Messiah any longer, like the Jews still do to this day. And that made me think of John 1:14. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and full of truth. So we don't need to wait anymore. We aren't left guessing. God has told us, Jesus has come, and our Messiah is here. So the other is Chani's line of thinking is that religion is something that was created to oppress and to control. And that's what our culture thinks too. You talk to anyone about religion, they're going to tell you something similar to that. Well, the Apostle Paul disagrees wholeheartedly with Chani and our culture. He says in Ephesians 4, I therefore, a prisoner from the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belonged to your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us in accordance with the measure of Christ's gift. So Jesus himself is the one and all, and religion was not created to oppress or to control anyone. Jesus actually came to free us. And so neutrality is a myth. A lot of people will try to say like, oh, I'm neutral to all of that. I don't have a side. I'm not picking anything like that. But Jesus' own words, you're either with him or against him. And so Christ came to bring freedom to all who would trust in him. And sin is the one that's actually oppressing and controlling, not religion. And so sin and the other false religions of like Islam, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, the prosperity gospel, atheism, those are all the things that are oppressing and controlling because you don't have freedom apart from Christ.
Absolutely. Amen.
I will add, if you don't mind, at least what I think could be a helpful clarifying point. And that's not that religion in and of itself exists for oppression. I will agree wholeheartedly with that. But that doesn't mean that people don't utilize it for that. And there certainly are within Christianity, and certainly from outside of Christianity, and with some of these other religions that have been named, those who will manipulate and utilize it. The movie, to get back sort of to the film side of this, we did an episode years and years ago on the Book of Eli, which is, I like to say, my favorite Christian movie.
It's a great,
such an amazing movie.
It's a good one.
And the whole deal with that movie is a character who wants a copy of God's word so he can have power. And it's to power to rule over people, which is another verse that we haven't really, that I meant to bring up in my section, which is that the way that power is used, the Gentiles lorded over others. And actually I'll save that for my redeem section. But the thing to reject would be this idea of revenge, right? I mean, and so as appealing as it is to exact revenge, and as much as that appeals to our flesh, revenge is not ours to take. And so justice is ours to be a part of being involved in within the proper structures that God has given us. But as opposed to being a vigilante. But in the case of this story, it really seems to laud revenge. And to that point, I think Maddy said, what exactly is it that sets Paul apart from Fade, right? What is it that makes Paul and Fade Routha different? Well, Paul's not needlessly cruel. Well, he's cruel at times to those who have wronged him. Meanwhile, that's not what we see with our actual Messiah. The real Messiah didn't lose everything and then burn the world to the ground, even though he definitely had the capacity to do that. Instead, he turned the other cheek. He bore our cross. He begged Father for him to forgive us because of the pain that we were causing him. I mean, it's such a stark contrast between Jesus and even Paul Muad'Dib. So, all right. So that was the reject round. Let's move on to things that we can receive or redeem from this story. So, Jam, what do you got?
I already said it. The cause of our Messiah is worth dying for. We should receive that 100%.
Yeah.
There were two themes that came to mind that we should absolutely receive, and it's hope and peace. So hope, the freemen hope in Paul to accomplish all that the prophecy says he will do. And we have that same hope, but it is actually realized in Christ. And then peace, the war is being fought for peace and for freedom in Dune. But in Christ, the war's over. He has won. And now we await his second coming to end all sin and suffering that we're experiencing currently. But Christ is victorious, and we are at peace with God as a result of that.
Amen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Preach. All right, Maddy, receive, redeem.
Yeah, so maybe I'll try to redeem Paul a little bit here when he has that line and he says, I see a way, a narrow way through. The one vision where humanity survives. And in Matthew 7:14, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So, Paul can see all these multiple paths or whatever. And I do appreciate that it's like, okay, there's only one true path though. This is the one that we have to take. And it may be that he's playing the long game, necessary evil to secure future benefits. I still feel like there's a lot of selfish motivations, but that's my opinion. And but again, I did like that line because it reminded me of the narrow way, and like this way is hard. Which I mean, even throughout the movie, just learning like the Fremen ways and such. It's a hard way. It's a hard way of life, but those people are better for it.
Absolutely. For sure. I think, and again, I wish we had seen more of the multiple paths that he was seeing and the considerations he was making during that time.
Yeah.
I think that my redeem point is going to be related to how we rule others, right? And I say rule, the relationships we have with others. In this case, we talked before about how belief informs practice. And what we really see is that those who believe that life is of value and that they are stewards of authority rather than rulers, they're going to lead a lot more similar to what Jesus describes. He says that the Gentiles that have authority rule over those, and they lord it over them. And that's really what the Harkonnens did, right? And so the Harkonnens were brutal to everybody. And instead, he said that you're not to be like that. You're supposed to love one another. And then he ultimately showed them, Jesus showed the disciples that by washing their feet. He said that, listen, I'm your master. The servant is not above the master, right? If I've suffered, you're going to suffer. If I wash feet, you're going to need to wash feet. And yeah, I think that there's certainly something there that we as Christians can take away, which is that one, if we are on the receive side, if we are given some sort of responsibility or authority, then we need to treat it as something that we've been gifted, not something that we have won rightfully. It's something that we have been granted, and so we need to take it very seriously. And another side to that is that we need to be, like I said, to care for others well. And that's really key, to be good stewards. We see this whole story mentions stewardship here and there, and it's not always executed very well. I think that's it. I think that's the main thing that I've got at this point. And of course, like we said again and again, this story highlights how religion is used in this world, in the world of Dune, but it doesn't spend much time on what the truth actually is. And we above all people should be champions for the truth. That's the most important thing. And the truth being the gospel Amen. Of Jesus Christ, not of the Bene Gesserit or of Paul Muad'Dib or any of that. So awesome. Well, hey, this has been a great episode. Thank you guys both so much for the stimulating discussion and for the back and forth and even for the disagreement. This has been great. We don't often get a lot of disagreement. So
yeah. Also, thanks to Miles and Joshua. They had a lot of great points that we pulled out of the chat, too.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. That's another great thing about being in our siege, is that, like we said, everyone's equal, right? In terms of that. There's no Jew nor Greek or anything like that.
Slave nor free.
Exactly. And so if you're in the Patron Saints, then you get to be involved in these episodes and actually join us live. And, quite often we'll actually draw excellent points through that interaction as we record. So fantastic. Well, there's a lot more discussion to be had, but that's what the social media channels are for. Make sure that you like this video if you're watching it. Make sure you subscribe, do the rate and review thing we talked about earlier. That's immensely helpful. And do all the, all the stuff that you do when you want to support somebody, right? It's very helpful for us. And until next time, keep engaging media from a godly worldview, and remember that you are not a mindless consumer.